How much do you know about the war that's been raging for 70,000 years? Imagine it this way. Natural selection is the only shareholder of a global business called All Living Things. Or for however many millions of thousands of years, natural selection called all the shots. And it was working well. But then, one of its subsidiaries decided it wanted a competitive advantage. It didn't want to be contained by the circle of life with a lowly step in the food chain. It wanted more of an advantage, at which point it discovered something that enabled it to take its destiny into its own hands. The subsidiary was called humanity. That discovery was the cognitive revolution. Now, this took place almost 70,000 years ago. The cognitive revolution is basically the point where Homo sapiens, our ancestors, were able to share ideas and stories that heightened their self-awareness. This gave humans their first big edge in the game of evolution. They no longer had to be the most physically dominant, but they could now coordinate more effectively. Of course, this revolution is explained in much more detail in books like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Now, this discovery was disruptive and controversial, if we keep thinking about it with this whole business metaphor. Natural selection was proud of its system. It seemed to keep everything in check. And so the cognitive revolution was a game changer, similar to the cryptocurrency revolution. And, use something complicated to explain something complicated, try and make it clearer, but bear with me. There was now a new advantage that would enable humanity to supersede the market system created by natural selection. In the same way cryptocurrencies permit holders of cryptocurrency to operate outside of the world's regulated monetary system, they are now playing their own game, which clashes with the old one. So by that we mean that the cognitive revolution for people, for you and I and our ancestors, enabled us to start playing a different game that was outside of the control of the old system. In the same way, for those of you who understand cryptocurrencies, they're outside of the control of our actual banking systems and the taxation system and all these things. So that's parallel to what's happened with our brains. So let's discuss how these games are a bit different. You see, natural selection cares only about the bottom line. Natural selection cares only about that bottom line. Think of natural selection like a crude industrialist or slave master who cares only about money coming in and not about work conditions. A marketplace shaped by natural selection is ruled by one thing: genetic material. No other variables or currencies matter. Natural selection does not care about making customers or employees feel happy. It only cares about passing your genetic material onto the next generation. That's it. But humanity became interested in much more. Because of the cognitive revolution, humanity's heightened self-awareness made it less and less content with a world that was concerned only with the passing on of genetic material from one generation to the next. Humanity came to care about the whole experience of customers and employees, of their meaning and fulfillment. Alas, it was and still is a small player in a big marketplace. We came to understand that this makes for better survival. Not just surviving, but better quality of that time we spend surviving. After all, when we treat our employees better, they perform better. If we care about our customers' experiences, they'll drive more value from the service and recommend it to others. That will make for a better world. Natural selection, on the other hand, looks at each customer as a one-off transaction, not a repeat customer. And we can pause here to say that natural selection looks at things as a very zero-sum game in many respects, and it's very short-term thinking, whereas after the cognitive revolution, we really have more script for long-term games, for positive-sum games, rather than zero-sum games. And the war goes on. Natural selection has been used to focusing on the bottom line for millions of years, and so it will take a very long time before it catches up to any form of thinking that is more progressive and holistic. Perhaps it will never care about making people happy and imbuing their lives with meaning. Natural selection is old and stubborn, set in its ways. And can you blame it? These ways have been working ever since the Big Bang. So that's from the blog post on the With Joe Wehbe website, the war that's been raging for 70,000 years. I just thought that was a really interesting way to open this part of our topic. So I should say, of course, thanks for joining us today on the With Joe Wehbe podcast. I find this topic very fascinating. One of my favorite first books I really got into was Sapiens, which I mentioned there, which obviously gives a much more accurate and in-depth summary into basically a brief history of humankind as its subtitle. So I recommend that as a read. It's a very foundational text to understanding how we've come to live this way. Now, we've talked about some ideas about how we're wired already, and what you'll notice is that when you look at how we got here through history, how we got in these bodies, how we got to this society, why it's built in this way, where the gaps and uneven parts are, you get a very deep understanding and answers to a lot of your biggest questions and areas of confusion. That's going to become clear as we move onto things, but we also talked about things already in these podcasts about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, about the comfort ladder. All of these things are understood once you understand this gap. We're going to talk about it a bit in the next episodes, this gap between how we're wired versus who we've become after the cognitive revolution, why the experience of the world is different. So first we use the metaphor of this story of the breakaway business partner, the young innovator who's changing the way the old guys have been doing it, the old-fashioned guys. The old-fashioned guys' way worked well at an earlier point in time, but it's become outdated. Things have changed, for better or for worse. And so it's been time in the context of our species story to try and change things, but there's a gap there. There's a tension between the new and the old, just like there is between crypto and the monetary system, or even maybe Uber and the taxi system. The tension lasts for a while. So that was the important idea, I think, to get across today. And something I'd invite you to take from this is thinking about how's the way we've evolved and been wired impacted some of the negative experiences, some of the gaps in individual lives, but in worlds and the way our culture is shaped. It's a very interesting and compelling thing to start observing on a regular basis. And we're going to unpack that in even more depth in the next episode. But for now, remember to read further on that blog post if you really want more information about this topic, the war that's been waging for 70,000 years. It's available on the With Joe Wehbe website, www.withjoewehbe.com. And until tomorrow, just remember that if you think of anyone when you listen to this, to think about whether it should be discussed with them, unpacked with them. After all, the best way to open 1,000 doors for you is to concentrate on opening doors for others. Thank you.